I understood what was in the doctor's mind. He looked at me. He knew what was in mine. "We can't kill the man, even if we want to," we agreed. But we promised to make as much trouble for him as we could. "We'll tell all our friends about this," we told the man. "Everyone in London will hear about it." And all the time we were keeping the women away from him. They were wild and dangerous because they were so angry. I never saw so many hate-filled faces. And there was the man in the middle. He was frightened, but he smiled an ugly smile and did not move. "If you want money," he said, "tell me. Nobody wants trouble with people like you." We told him to give £100 to the child and her family. At first he didn't want to agree to this, but the little crowd round him looked dangerous, and at last he said, "All right, I'll pay." Next, we had to get the money. And where do you think he took us? To that ugly place with the door. He pulled a key out of his pocket, unlocked the door, and went in. We waited outside. After a time, he came out with £10 in money and a cheque for the rest. The cheque was signed, and the signature surprised me. It was the name of a famous man. I can't tell you the name, but you probably know it well. "I don't like this," I said. "You walk through a door like that at 4 o'clock in the morning and come out of it with another man's cheque for nearly £100. It's very unusual." He smiled his ugly smile again and answered, "You don't need to worry. I'll stay with you until the bank's open, and then I'll get the money with the cheque." The child's father, the man, and I went to my house and waited there until the morning. After breakfast, we all went to the bank together with the cheque, and the bank paid the money without question. Chapter 3. The Cheque. Mr. Utterson looked shocked. "Oh dear," he said. "That's a terrible story." "Yes, I agree," said Mr. Enfield. "It's a shocking story. Nobody would like the unpleasant man who hurt the girl, but another man signed the cheque, and he is exactly the opposite. A really fine, honest man, and very famous for his good work." "What is the name of the man who walked over the child?" asked Mr. Utterson. "His name is Mr. Hyde," said Mr. Enfield. "And the man who signed the cheque, does he live in that house?" asked Mr. Utterson. "Do you know?" "Behind that door?" Mr. Enfield said. "No, he doesn't. His house is in a square, but I don't remember the name of the square. The place behind the door doesn't really seem like a house. There are 3 windows on the first floor over the courtyard. They are always shut, but they are clean. Somebody lives there, but the houses are all near together round the courtyard. You can't be sure how many there are. There doesn't seem to be another door, and nobody uses the door that I showed you, except the man that I have told you about." Mr. Utterson walked in silence. It was clear that he was thinking. At last he said, "Are you sure that he used a key?" Mr. Enfield was clearly surprised. "Well," he began. The lawyer continued, "I'm sorry. It must seem a strange question. But there is a reason for it. I already know the name of the man who signed the cheque." Chapter 4. Who is Mr. Hyde? That evening, Mr. Utterson ate his dinner without much interest. He was not really hungry. There was too much on his mind. After dinner, he usually read a book until midnight, and then went to bed. But that night, he took a light and went into his office. There he opened his safe and took out an envelope. On it were the words, Dr. Jekyll's will. He sat down and began to read the will with a worried look on his face. The will was in Dr. Jekyll's writing. Mr. Utterson refused to help the doctor when he wrote it. The lawyer had to keep it for the doctor. It was his job. But he did not like the will. The will was clear. If Henry Jekyll dies, his house and all his money passes into the hands of his friend and helper, Edward Hyde. And, if Dr. Jekyll disappears for 3 months, the same Edward Hyde will own everything immediately. The lawyer disliked this will. He did not like it as a lawyer, and it made him angry as a person. He liked people to do things in an ordinary way. My dislike was very strong when Hyde was only a name, he said to himself. Now I know some very unpleasant things about the man with that name, and it makes it worse. I thought that Jekyll was mad. Now I'm beginning to think he's afraid. After some time, he put the will back into his safe. Then he put on a coat and hat and went out into the cold night. He went to Cavendish Square to visit his friend, the famous Dr. Lanyon. If someone knows something about this, it is Lanyon, he thought. He soon reached Cavendish Square and his friend's house. Dr. Lanyon's servant was glad to see Mr. Utterson, and took the lawyer straight to the dining room. Dr. Lanyon was finishing his dinner. The doctor was a happy, healthy man with a red face. When he saw Mr. Utterson, he jumped up. "It's good to see you, Utterson," he said. "Sit down and make yourself comfortable." They always enjoyed their visits. After a little general talk, the lawyer spoke about Dr. Jekyll. You and I, Lanyon, are surely Henry Jekyll's 2 oldest friends, he said. "It is a pity that the friends are not younger," said Dr. Lanyon, smiling. "But yes, we probably are his oldest friends. But I don't see him very often now." "Oh? Is that right? I'm surprised to hear it," said Mr. Utterson. "I thought that you were both interested in the same scientific work." "We were," Dr. Lanyon replied. "But then Henry Jekyll began to have some strange ideas that I could not agree with. He began to go wrong, or that is my opinion. How? Wrong in the mind, I think. Of course I am still interested in him." Utterson waited for a minute, then asked, "Did you ever meet a man that he knows? A man with the name of Hyde?" "Hyde?" said Lanyon quickly. "No, I never heard Henry Jekyll say that name." And that was all the information that Mr. Utterson went home with that evening. But Enfield's story did not leave his mind. He could not stop thinking about it, and he slept badly that night. I must see this Mr. Hyde, he thought. I must see this man that Enfield hates so strongly. The man seems to have power over Henry Jekyll. Perhaps then I shall understand the mystery of Dr. Jekyll's will. From that day, Mr. Utterson began to watch the door in the street of little shops when he had time. He watched it in the morning before he went to his office. He watched at lunchtime when the street was busy. He watched again at night under the moonlight. He was a patient man. And at last, at about 10 o'clock one cold night, he heard some quick steps coming towards the door. Mr. Utterson stepped into the entrance to the courtyard. The man walked quickly round the corner. He was small and was dressed in very plain clothes. Utterson could not see the man's face clearly, but he still felt a strong dislike for him. The man walked straight towards the door and took a key from his pocket. Mr. Utterson moved out and touched him on the shoulder. "Mr. Hyde, I think," he said. Mr. Hyde moved a step away. But if he was afraid, his fear quickly disappeared. He did not look at the lawyer's face, but he said quite coldly, "That is my name. What do you want?" "I see that you are going in," the lawyer answered. "I am an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's. I am sure that you have heard my name, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. Perhaps you'll save my tired feet and give me your permission to go in with you through this door." "You won't find Dr. Jekyll at home," replied Mr. Hyde. "He is out." And then, suddenly, but still without looking up, he said, "How did you know me?" "Before I answer your question, will you do something for me?" said Utterson. "Of course," said the other man. "Can I see your face?" said Utterson. Mr. Hyde seemed to think for a minute. Then he turned round and looked straight at Mr. Utterson. "Thank you," said Utterson. "Now I will know you again." "Yes," said Hyde. "And you can have my address, too." And he gave Utterson a card with an address in Soho. Mr. Utterson was surprised. Why did he give me his address, he thought. Is he thinking of Henry Jekyll's will? He did not show what he was feeling. He put the card in his pocket and said, "Thank you." "And now I will repeat my question," said Hyde. "How did you know me?" "By description." "Who described me?" said Hyde. Mr. Utterson thought quickly. "There are people who know both of us," he said. "Who are they?" "Jekyll is one," said the lawyer. "He did not tell you about me," cried Mr. Hyde angrily. "Don't lie!" And moving quickly, he went to the door. He unlocked it and disappeared into the house. Mr. Utterson stood for a minute. Then he walked slowly away, turning a problem over in his mind. Mr. Hyde was pale and small, and he had an ugly smile. He spoke to the lawyer in a soft, broken voice, mixing politeness and rudeness. But these were not important matters. They did not explain the feelings of hate and fear that Mr. Utterson had. There was something more. The lawyer could not find a name for it. It is something about the man. Some terrible evil, he thought. Oh, my poor Henry Jekyll. There is evil in the face of your new friend. Chapter 5. After Dinner. Mr. Utterson was very glad when about 2 weeks later Dr. Jekyll gave one of his pleasant dinner parties for 5 or 6 old friends. They were all intelligent men, and they all enjoyed good conversation and fine wine, so they were happy to come to the doctor's house. And as usual, the lawyer stayed after the others went home. Mr. Utterson and Dr. Jekyll sat together, one on each side of the fireplace. "I wanted to speak to you, Jekyll," Utterson began. "Oh?" said the doctor. "What about?" "About your will," said the lawyer. It was clear that the doctor did not like the subject, but he smiled. "My poor Utterson," he said, "I am very sorry that it worries you. You worry more than anyone. Oh, except Lanyon. He seems worried about my scientific work. But he is a good man, like you." "You know that I never liked that will," said the lawyer. He refused to talk about other things. "Yes, I know that," said the doctor. "You told me." "Well, I'll tell you again," said Utterson. "And I have learned something about Hyde." Dr. Jekyll's face went pale. "I don't want to listen," he said. "I heard a very bad thing," said Utterson. "It doesn't change anything," said Jekyll. "It must," said Utterson. "I am sorry, but you don't understand, Utterson," said the doctor. "It is a very strange business. Very strange. It won't become better if we talk about it. There is nothing more to say about it." "Henry," said Utterson, "you know me. You know that you can trust me. Tell me all about it. I am sure that I can get you out of trouble." "You are a really good man, Utterson," the doctor said. "I can't find words to thank you. I trust you more than any other person. But it isn't what you think. I can tell you one thing. When I want to, I can be free of Hyde." Mr. Utterson started to speak, but Jekyll stopped him. "You should know something," said Jekyll. "I am very interested in poor Hyde. I know that you have seen him. He told me that. And I am afraid that he was not polite. But I do take great interest in that young man. I want to ask you to do what is right. Help him to get the things that are in my will. Can you give me that promise? It is very important to me." "I can't say that I will ever like him," said the lawyer. "I don't ask for that," said Jekyll. He put his hand on his old friend's arm. "You are my friend. I only want you to help him when I die." Utterson looked very unhappy, but at last he said, "All right. I promise." Around the corner, at the end of the street of small shops, there was a square of old houses. They were nearly all flats and offices now, but one house, the second from the corner, was still owned by one person. Mr. Utterson went to the door of this house and knocked. A well-dressed old servant opened the door. "Is Dr. Jekyll at home, Poole?" asked the lawyer. "I will go and see, Mr. Utterson," said Poole. "Come in." He showed the lawyer into a large room and pointed to a big chair. "Would you like to sit there, sir?" said Poole. "I won't be long." "Thank you," said Mr. Utterson. He liked waiting in this room. He usually thought how pleasant it was. But tonight he could not forget the face of Mr. Hyde. It seemed to be in every corner of the room, in every moving light that burned in the fireplace. Mr. Utterson was worried and afraid. He sat and thought. He did not know what to say to his friend. Then Poole came back. Mr. Utterson was really quite glad when he said, "Dr. Jekyll has gone out, sir." "I saw Mr. Hyde go in by the old workroom door, Poole," he said. "Is that all right when Dr. Jekyll is out?" "Yes, it is usual, sir," the servant replied. "Are you sure?" said Utterson. "Yes," said Poole. "Mr. Hyde has a key." "Does he?" said Utterson. "Dr. Jekyll seems to trust that young man, Poole." "Yes, sir, he does," said Poole. "Dr. Jekyll has told us to take orders from Mr. Hyde. When he is not here, Mr. Hyde takes his place." "I don't think I have ever met Mr. Hyde here," said Mr. Utterson. "Oh, no, sir. He never comes to dinner here," replied the servant. "In fact, we don't often see him in this house. He usually comes and goes through the workroom." They were silent for a minute or two. Then Mr. Utterson said, "Good night, Poole." "Good night, Mr. Utterson," said Poole. The lawyer started to walk home. He was very sad as he thought about his friend. "Poor Henry Jekyll," he thought. "I am afraid that he is in some sort of trouble. He was quite wild when he was a young man. Has something come back from the past to destroy him now? I hope not." So, Hyde was free to come and go in Jekyll's house. That worried Utterson. "If that evil man learns about the will," he thought, "perhaps he will want to hurry Jekyll's death, or help him to disappear. Then he will be able to enjoy the things that Jekyll owns now. I must do something about it, if Jekyll will let me. If he will let me."